When the DJI Osmo Pocket 4 was released, I think a lot of people felt like this is going to be a bad upgrade. The form factor very much is unchanged between the Osmo Pocket 3 and the Osmo Pocket 4. The sensor is the same size, and a lot of things and even the accessories still work on the Osmo Pocket 3 as it does on the 4. However, after using this guy, I can't necessarily think that's more far than the truth, because in today's video, we are going to do a product showcase of the Osmo Pocket 4 and why I think not necessarily the body design is going to be different, but everything in the inside makes it better in almost every single way. We'll get there. Now, this video, I guess technically is sponsored by DJI. I borrowed this Osmo Pocket 4. I probably will get one on my own at some point in time, depending on how things go. But I want to go over all the features that make this camera unique. And then I'm going to follow this up with actually comparing it to, well, this guy. This is the Osmo Pocket 3, so figure out if it's an actual update. But let's go over all the new things that are in this guy. Now, first things first, if you're looking for a drastically new sensor or the rumored Osmo Pocket Pro, two things. One, you're going to be disappointed because this is the same sized 1-inch sensor as the Osmo Pocket 3. And two, let's all collectively stop sitting so close to the TV with rumor sites, because it doesn't necessarily mean everything they say is right. Now, this is going to be a same size sensor as the Osmo Pocket 3, but it doesn't mean that it's the same sensor as the Osmo Pocket 3. Full frame cameras do this all the time, where the sensor size might be the same, but the upgrades to the sensor themselves are going to be a little bit different. And that also is going to be consistent with one of these guys. For one, you're going to have the ability to shoot up to 4K 240 frames a second, something that you couldn't do on the Osmo Pocket 3 previously. You're also going to be able to use DLOG. Not an M, just regular DLOG. And when comparing the footage between DLOG and DLOG-M, it's not even close, man. You're going to get 14 stops of dynamic range, and however many true stops that is, it's more than what the Osmo Pocket 3 is offering in DLOG-M. This means that you're going to be able to have better highlight roll-off, better highlight retention when you are shooting things with skies in them. Skin tones are going to be a lot easier to deal with, especially me who has darker skin tones. Being able to make sure that I get the colors and the look that I want out of the image is going to be a lot easier and better using DLOG versus DLOG-M, which is one of the first big upgrades on the Osmo Pocket 4 that I think people are going to start talking about. Also going to have a 20mm equivalent lens that's going to be on this guy, but you do have this wide angle lens. It's going to come with the creator combo as well. Now, just as a note here, I only have a sample version of this, so I don't have the full creator combo, but when I do pick up one for myself, I'll kind of go over all the accessories in there and whether or not that's worth the purchase. But effectively, this is going to be the same sensor, the same lens as the Osmo Pocket 3. However, it's going to add a whole different look to your footage because you're able to use D-Log with more dynamic range. Now, when you flick this guy open, and we'll talk about the body design and how it's actually not that much different outside of these two buttons, you actually do get a couple of things on it here. One, you're going to get a zoom button. Now, I'm going to talk about just the zoom button itself, but you are going to get a 2x lossless zoom similar to the Osmo Pocket 3. Now, in the next video, I'm going to compare these two to find out whether or not the zoom is going to be better or worse, but being able to use the zoom here and have it as a button is a lot easier than having to tap on the Osmo Pocket 3 screen and have to go from the gimbal motion that's on there and also on the zoom. I got that wrong most of the time, and when I used the joystick, it would do things I didn't want it to do. Just kind of putting it on a button is very nice. Now, if I want to do it, I could click once and I could zoom in. If I click once, I can go back to regular. And if I click 2 times, I could actually go to a 4x zoom. Now, whether or not that's lossless is still left to be determined. I haven't done a proper test to find out if the lossless zoom at 4x is actually lossless at all, because it still says 4K 24 frames a second. However, the fact that you can zoom in 4x with only the click of a button or 2 clicks of a button is something that's a super welcome feature. Later on, we'll talk about the custom button and some of the custom button settings that I do have, but one thing I want to point out is that, yeah, you can just kind of do it on here now instead of having to touch up the screen and get fingerprints on it all the time. One thing that doesn't change on the Osmo Pocket 4 is going to be the 3-axis gimbal onto here. This is going to give you the ability to do things like following and tilt lock, and also using it in FPV mode. Essentially, the stabilization onto here is going to be part of the gimbal technology that DJI's excelled at for years now. So if you're looking for a different gimbal experience, in my experience from using the Pocket 3, which actually I've had for like 18 months, never made a video on it, but it's going to be very similar using that on the Osmo Pocket 4, which I don't think was much of a problem anyway, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You do have film looks on the Pocket 4 that's very similar to the Action 6. Now, Like back in January, I talked about the DJI Action 6 and how you have different film looks, and that you could change the intensity of those film looks on the Action 6 the same as you can on the Pocket 4. That way, if you want to shoot in your normal 10-bit color, but you still want to have a little bit of grading or something that looks good right at a camera, you're able to do that without the friction of actually having to learn DLOG. Now, I can't promise you the same dynamic range had you used DLOG in the first place, but being able to have that for something that's quick turnaround, you don't want to grade, you don't know how to grade, or if we're all going to be honest, if 1 million people buy this, there's like at least 700,000 that don't necessarily know how to grade log footage. That way, you don't have to embarrass yourself, or others, or me. You would embarrass me, but you know what I mean. Now we're going to go into another big upgrade on the Osmo Pocket 4, and it's not necessarily in the image, but it's how you actually work with it, because you do have internal storage on this guy. On the Osmo Pocket 3, you did immediately have to get SD cards or micro SD cards in order to actually store footage and start shooting right away. On the Osmo Pocket 4, you don't have to worry about that because it does have 107 gigabytes internal on the camera itself, which does sit around 3 hours in order for you to get your full record time out. But one of the things that I consider a game changer on that is that SD cards are super expensive right now, and being able to have it internal on the camera itself, I think is a giant pickup. I think it's a giant upgrade, especially when you want to keep everything in one compact package. And also you don't want to have to go back into the store and buy new things after you already spent all your money on the camera. Even more so than that, the transfer speeds are going to be incredibly fast. You have about 800 megabits per second if you are going to transfer files to your computer. I just bought a new laptop, and being able to get footage right off of this guy incredibly quickly, especially because I only had a couple of days with this, I have to give it back and I do want to transfer all the files over. You're able to do that on this guy at an incredibly fast rate, or much faster than what you would have a standard SD card. So if you are going to transfer files in the Osmo Pocket 4, one thing you want to do is do not connect it to the battery pack USB, connect it directly to the camera. I'm transferring from the Osmo Pocket 4 475 files directly into my SSD, and even at the time of me talking about this, it's kind of been going already in this little time frame, but it's going to take you less than a minute. Now, I only have about 53 gigabytes onto this guy. This does hold 107, but in double the time of that even, you'll get all of that done in 2 minutes. Now, the Active Track on the Osmo Pocket 3, some people love, some people don't like, but you do have an upgrade in the Active Track 7.0. Now, again, in the next video, I'm going to compare this to the Active Track 6 just to see if there actually is a difference there. And despite the fact that maybe I don't necessarily see it in either direction, but one thing I will say is that there are things that have Active Track 7.0 in the shooting modes on the Osmo Pocket 4 that aren't offered on the Osmo Pocket 3. For example, if I am going to shoot in the high frame rate modes, you don't have Active Track on the Osmo Pocket 3, where on the Pocket 4 you do. And if I'm shooting in low light, you also have Active Track as well, where it's not offered on the 3, but it is on the Osmo Pocket 4. Now, another thing that's newer on the Osmo Pocket 4 is that it can go into slower shutter speeds. Now, this might not have a lot of applications for yourself, but some people like using a slow stuttering effect on their footage, where on the Osmo Pocket 3, the shutter speed didn't go as low. You can get down to about, actually, let me just check here. I think it's like 1/4. You get down to about 1/4 of a second, which is actually pretty handy if you are looking for that slow shutter effect. So if that's something that you want to add into your workflow, you absolutely can. Or it is a little bit higher on the Osmo Pocket 3, which, again, we're going to get into the next video. In fact, I'm probably going to have that video in the next 24 hours if you want to see that comparison. Right now, we're just talking about all the things that this can do. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the body of this guy, because it does look almost identical to the Osmo Pocket 3, but it is a little bit longer to actually accommodate for those 2 little custom buttons. Now, we talked about the zoom button before, but the custom C button can be customized to having 3 different settings depending on how many times you want to tap the button. I said button a lot, but this is going to make sense. There are different custom settings that you might want to flip through in order to make your experience a little bit easier. For example, if you want to center the gimbal, or you want to change between your custom profiles, or you want to go from normal mode to night mode we'll talk about in a little bit, you're able to do that by customizing this button, and depending on how many taps, whether you want to go 1, 2, or 3, you can make sure that all the modes that you use the most are at the touch of your fingers instead of going into the menus and trying to figure things out. Another thing I want to talk about on this guy, and this is going to be more relevant when I get the creator combo with the Mic 3, is the fact that you can go 4 channels of audio just in case you have 4 people inside of a video. It actually opens up the door to potentially being able to have things like podcasts or panel discussions while using Osmo Pocket 4s. The image quality is already greatly improved, and audio needs to match the image, so being able to use microphones like the DJI Mic 3s and be able to store separate audio files on the Pocket itself so it syncs up properly, that's a big pickup. It's not necessarily something that's going to get talked about a lot because most people don't talk about audio, but the ability to do that on this guy is super, super nice. The Osmo Pocket 4 does have fast charging onto this. I wasn't able to get enough time to actually test how fast it actually is, but it's much quicker than I expected to when I'm just plugged into a USB port, but it is pretty quick when I'm plugged into a USB-C to just a regular wall mount. Speaking of remember that you can get photos on the Osmo Pocket 4. You can do it on the Osmo Pocket 3, It's just now you have something called super photo mode. This is going to give you the ability to have 37 megapixel photos, which makes this a pretty viable photography camera. If you're doing street photography, you could lock down the gimbal and you can get photos on this guy, which, I mean, I have other cameras that I can do that with, but it is super nice that you do have high resolution, high megapixel photos that you can get out of the Osmo Pocket 4. This kind of makes it more of a hybrid camera, if anything else, but also a really tiny little cute guy. So you are going to be able to have the option to do both and also have the ability to have a higher resolution to work with. So that way you could crop and manipulate things however you'd like. Now, something that's not necessarily new to the Osmo Pocket cameras, but new to actually being in the creator combo is going to be the fill light. Now, this little tiny fill light, which I don't really have on me right now, is going to give you a couple of different options. For one, you're going to be able to turn the intensity higher and lower on this guy, which gives you control over some low light situations, or if you just need a brighter light, and as well as you could change the temperature in 3 different settings. This means you're generally going to be able to match up some of the ambient tones in terms of getting your white balance correct, and if you're shooting in low light situations, this is going to be a great option for you. Okay, so we are checking out the super night mode. I'm also going to use a little fill light that comes with the creator combo as well. Now you could change the intensity. I could just kind of go over here. I could press this button. It's really, really bright. Or I could also change the color temperature depending on where I am. And this might come in handy if you want to get exposure on your face. Now, when shooting in low light, sometimes you might run into a situation where you don't want to pump the ISO up super high. So this might be a healthy alternative. Now, one thing I want to check out, because in super night mode, you don't have access to DLOG, is I want to try using this in DLOG M to see which one looks better. And I'll kind of let you guys in the comments actually figure out where you want to kind of place yourself, if you like super night mode or if you like DLOG instead. Speaking of low light, this guy actually is pretty decent in low light. Now, you can go into your super night mode onto here, and it does have it in a range. You can't use DLOG, you'll use normal, which, I mean, I tried using it in DLOG, and we'll talk about DLOG in a little bit, but you are going to be able to get up to 25,600 ISO in that little range to make sure that you can get the actual exposure on your low light footage. Now, for me personally, smaller sensors in low light, it's just physics. It's not the greatest in the world. It's not going to be compared to an FX3 or anything like that. However, I think on cameras just like these, I think it's important that you get the shot more so than whether or not the shot looks like you shot it on a $50,000 cinema camera. And like I mentioned before, you can still use after track on this. So if you are vlogging in low light, you can actually keep this tracking on your face while at the same time you're shooting in a darker situation. And you could also use that fill light as well, which is really nice too. Now, my personal opinion, I do think that the Osmo Pocket 4 actually does have significant upgrades where it actually counts. In terms of your workflow, having internal memory and being fast at actually transferring that memory. In terms of having an updated sensor where you can use DLOG into there, low light footage looks great. The actual custom buttons onto there makes the workflow of actually operating the camera easier. And as well as in the creator combo, you're going to get a better microphone, you're going to get a fill light, and all the other stuff that makes a lot of sense. However, that doesn't mean that this camera is going to be perfect. There are still some things that actually have to do with the fact that it doesn't look that much different than the Osmo Pocket 3 that might be a bit of a hindrance. But before we talk about that, I am going to talk about the DLOG. Now, DLOG is going to give you more dynamic range. You're going to have better color fidelity. Everything is overall in your image quality going to look better. However, there's 2 things. One, your base ISO is going to be a little bit higher than it would be if you're using DLOG M. If you're using DLOG M on the Osmo Pocket 3, your ISO base is going to be about 50, which base, I mean, is the lowest that you can go to reduce the amount of noise. On the Osmo Pocket 4, on the other hand, it's going to be 400, which is 100, 200, which is about 3 stops higher on the Osmo Pocket 4 than it is on the 3, which means that some of your ND filter choices are going to be a bit different. On top of that, when I go higher than 400, it does introduce a little bit of noise. Now, for me personally, I know how to use noise reduction. I can get rid of a lot of that stuff, but people that might be new, this might be something that looks a bit off-putting. When working with log footage on some of the older mirrorless cameras, there was a little bit of noise that was in your shadows, and once you graded it, everything looked good, but that's something you're going to see right away, even if you're going to like 800 or 1600 ISO. It's easy to clean up once you've graded it, but it is going to show up when you're using DLOG on the Osmo Pocket 4. The second thing is that 4K 240 frames a second is something I might not use as much, but it's useful for some people. But at the time of this video, and technically it does ask me for a firmware update onto here, so it might actually change, but DLOG M doesn't work in 4K 240 frames a second, which means you could shoot in your normal custom profile and you could still use your film sims, but you just can't use DLOG. So if I want to match up that footage in terms of my 240 frames a second to my other footage, that's going to be a bit more tricky because you don't have the ability to use DLOG in both. The other one, which is something that might be a downside, but it's something I don't care that much about, is going to be the 1-inch sensor nomenclature that comes with the Osmo Pocket 4. Now, some people might say, well, this is an actual 1-inch sensor, and I would say, I don't really care. If the footage is good and the business is true and you didn't get your moms out the hood, then I'm going to say that if this camera is 15 inches, I don't really care. I care that the image looks good. And if that's going to be associated with 1 inch versus not 1 inch or micro 4/3, whatever it is, The sensor size doesn't make a big deal to me unless it's relative to another sensor size, but I wouldn't know what a 1-inch sensor looks like just by looking at it. Much like if I'm looking at Super 35 and full frame, unless I see them together, I don't know which one is which. So yes, is a 1-inch sensor technically not 1 inch exactly? Is it smaller? Yes. But does the footage look bad? Probably not, and I think that's the more important thing here, at least in my opinion. Now, another thing on the Pocket 4 that's the same as the Pocket 3, which I think is the reason why some people are a little bit upset about this, is the fact that this is still a fixed 20mm lens with a fixed f2, which also impacts your ND filter decisions like we mentioned before, because I can't stop down if I don't have the proper ND filters, as well as I think some people were looking for having multiple lenses on this guy, to which I'll say, stop looking at those rumor sites, they're lying to you. Now, this guy's going to have a lot of similarities to the Osmo Pocket 3. However, I think when you have a fixed lens camera, you are going to have limitations in terms of your field of view, in terms of your composition and your creative choices, where mirrorless cameras don't have that because they have interchangeable lenses. Or at least a camera with 2 lenses would be a little bit different because you would have a couple of options there. Now, with that also comes the fact that it is a fixed aperture. I can't stop down and go to f4 or 5.6 or f8, especially if I want to compensate for A, the background blur, or B, I just don't necessarily want to use high stop ND filters and I want to make my image a little bit darker. This might be a limitation that some people may experience. I will say that like getting ND filters are fairly inexpensive relative to the cost of other ND filters, but I can see how that could be an annoyance. Now, this one has more to do with this guy. Now, this is a wide angle lens that comes with the creator combo for the Osmo Pocket 4, but it doesn't have ND filter. So even if I want to get a wider angle field of view, but then I also want to shoot outside because I think that's where most people are going to shoot, I can't get an ND filter in order to fix my exposure. And with an ISO value on DLOG that's higher up at 400, and then also not getting NDs onto this guy as well, that could be a problem because now I either have to shoot in auto, which maybe I don't want to do because I want to keep my 180-degree shutter rule, but also if I want to get a wider field of view, I have to make that decision of whether or not I'm willing to give up using an ND filter to get wider field of view or not use this accessory at all and still be able to control my exposure. This is something where I hope DJI comes out with ones with NDs on them. So yeah, that could be an annoyance, which has to do with the fact that the camera on here and the lens is unchanged. Another thing of this is going to be a random one, but Super Night Mode doesn't actually have the 2x lossless zoom. In fact, you can't zoom at all. I tried doing this while getting a couple of nightscapes and I couldn't actually zoom in on the lens. So if you want to get a tighter angle by zooming into a 40mm equivalent while shooting in low light in the low light mode, you can't do that. You got to use DLOG in there. And like I mentioned before, you may introduce a bit of noise or quite a bit of noise if you are going to pump up your ISO on this camera. So if you are looking for tighter shots in low light, something that's not available yet. However, I will mention this. Because this is a borrowed camera, I haven't updated the firmware, and I don't know the person I borrowed it from has updated the firmware in this, so I could totally be wrong. And the last thing onto this guy has to do with the fact that, yes, this is very much the same body as the Osmo Pocket 3, which means its durability is probably going to be the same. In fact, they kind of feel the same. So that means that, hey, this is probably not going to be waterproof. The reason why I'm making this video inside or finishing this video inside is because it's currently raining, and I have to give this camera back today. So I can't test this in the rain to see how waterproof it is because, one, it's not mine, and two, the Osmo Pocket 3 isn't waterproof, and I don't think this guy is either. So if you're looking for something that's going to be more waterproof, it's not. It even has these little kind of, actually, nope, they're not fans, but I don't think you should put this in water at any point in time. Also, if you're someone who's very clumsy and you break things that have gimbals on them, or you feel intimidated by things that have gimbals on them because you might break them, yeah, it's the same gimbal, so that might be something that might turn you off a little bit. Now, in terms of price and availability, I actually don't know how this is going to work out for American consumers, because to my knowledge, I don't know if there's going to be an American release. However, I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and we actually have the prices for our Creator Combo, our Essential Combo, and as well as the camera by itself. And it's a little bit more than the Osmo Pocket 3 is right now. However, I still think that this still fits into that Osmo Pocket kind of camera price point, unless you're talking about the Creator Combo, which actually is very close to mirrorless cameras. However, having all the accessories that you need to start shooting in that combo makes a lot of sense. If you are someone that's in the States and you have some sort of a pulse in terms of if the Osmo Pocket 4 is going to be offered, by all means, let me know, because I don't particularly know. But also, if you're someone who is from Canada, one of the things I'm going to say is that I am partnered with Excellent Photo. Now, they are pretty much the B&H of Canada. They're located in Montreal, Canada. They're a very, very cool store. I'm actually currently working on a documentary project with them as well. And not only is it a really cool place to check out the latest and greatest camera gear, it also has incredibly fast shipping times and more stock than I think most other people would have. So if you want to get this camera right away and you do live in Canada, you can always order it from Excellent Photo, and they'll probably get it to you faster than most. This video is not sponsored by them. I am working with them on other projects, but I figured that if you are someone who also lives in Canada, this might be a place that you want to pick this guy up. That being said, this is my overview of the Osmo Pocket 4. Now, I do gotta owe you guys an apology. I only had about like 36 to 48 hours with this guy. I do have to bring it back. So for all intents and purposes, this is all of the stuff that I know from shooting with it for 28 hours straight. But that being said, if you guys have any questions, leave a comment down below. And if you want to wait like 23 hours and 59 minutes, I'm going to have a comparison between this and the Osmo Pocket 3 with a whole bunch of footage. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.